We're also very honored to have Bill and Dave Franke here today. When we were planning this conference and we knew we wanted to put a little thought into how far we had come over the last 40 years, Bill became the obvious choice to be asked to be keynote on it. We all appreciate you accepting that invitation. The reason is that I could not think of anybody that has a more positive impact on our program over the last 40 years than Bill Franke and his family. So thank you, Bill.
So Bill Franke, in addition to being the benefactor of the Franke College of Business here at NAU, is managing partner of Indigo Partners, LLC. And I just want to say a brief moment about how he uses that position for the benefit of our students. So the two most sought after things, competitive things in the College of Business every year are the Warren Buffett trip and the Indigo Partners internship. He really takes the interns under his wing, gives them some incredible opportunities, and launches some pretty amazing careers. And that's a significant benefit to our students. So it's hard to categorize Bill's career because it's included forest products, it's included convenience stores, banks, retail, could go on and on. But what he seems to be a master at is at either taking companies that are on a solid footing and moving them to the next level of profitability, or in turning around companies that are in trouble. And we're seeing that now with Frontier Airlines, which I think posted the first profit in over a decade this past year. Very quick turnaround of that airline. I'm going to Denver tomorrow, so I'm going to check it out, or later this week. So Mr. Franke has had a varied career, currently heavily invested in the airline industry, and we're very happy to have him as not only our benefactor, but our friend. So, Mr. Franke.
Well, hello, everybody. I have some remarks that will vary at some degree from those of the economists that were made earlier. I'd also like to make a comment that I feel a little intimidated by the fact that my predecessors to this included Robert Reich and Gene Sperling, whose views I certainly won't try to compete with, and considering our respective political views, probably couldn't compete with. I listened to the panel, and I have comments for each of you. Number one, Elliot, had I only known you'd gone to USC, I would have done something to tank your career, I guarantee you. As a Stanford guy, you know, they can't do that. And secondly, to Professor Gunderson, I would say, in terms of it's just money, his comments about it's just going to keep spending, I have been inside all kinds of companies, and I guarantee you, as they say in Texas, I'll hit my hip over this, that I can take 5% out of the cost of anything that I walk into. And I would be shocked if the government couldn't find 5% in its budget. And for Professor Foster, I'm sorry, I have an admonition for you. I'm disappointed in you. It's perfectly clear to me that those wonderful slides you have on historic GNP and inflation and value of money, you've never walked down the hall and given them to Professor Gunderson, who needs those slides. Well, I'm going to just take you on a walk around, be an anecdotal commentary on the world's major economies. I deal in the world's major economies. I have for many years. Born in Texas, but raised in Latin America. I've been the chairman of companies in Argentina and Brazil. I've been the principal controlling shareholder of airlines all over the world. I've had offices in Singapore. And so I have a more worldly and probably more practical view than some of those you heard earlier today. I'm not a trained economist. I am a pragmatist, and I live the economic theory they talked about. I live it every day of my life in the real world. So I'm going to take you around, and we'll talk about the economies as I see them unfolding. We'll start with the U.S. because we're all here, and that seems to be the focus. It seems like the U.S. is in some kind of recovery, más o menos, as they say, can't be sure. Certainly unemployment is imperfectly measured, and it is imperfectly measured, Elliot, has enjoyed fairly consistent reported decline. That's noteworthy unless, that is, you're an unfortunate employed in heavy manufacturing, energy, steel, coal, minerals, banking, or traditional big box retail. You haven't felt that uplift. Maybe it hasn't been a recovery for you at this point in time. That said, the Fed notes that there is the beginning of a push on wages, except for those I just noted, at least on a regional basis, and the general consensus is that the Fed will move to hike interest rates probably before year end. That, of course, is a quasi-political decision, and I imagine Chairman Yellen would not want to embarrass the administration by guessing wrong and risk tanking the economy. But that said, I'm betting that there will be a rate increase this year, and so I have to wonder what that means for the investor. Leaving aside currency plays, as I think several of the panelists spoke to, tied to a strengthening dollar and/or plays against weakening foreign currencies, I'm a little uncertain what a rate increase does for an equity investor. In theory, it assists in moderating inflation, but as we've all noted, at the current point in time, what inflation? It will certainly hurt U.S. exports and create an uncertainty about the direction of the manufacturing economy. That altogether will make it difficult for equity markets. They'll have a hard time swallowing the rate increase, and I think it will increase what we see today in the stock market, which is a trading mentality. That seems to be a stock picker's life in today's world. I don't see that. I think that's going to be exacerbated by a rate increase while people try to sort out the impact on equities and on debt. Turning to China, I heard remarks earlier about China. You know, it's very hard to know what is actually going on inside China's economy. All we really know is gleaned from other countries' export data and to the extent shared by China's imports. We do know that if you're a supplier of pretty much anything to China, things have not been too good for you. Just look at Arizona's Freeport-McMoRan, former Phelps Dodge. Faced with a still uncertain Chinese market for copper, it has forced layoffs, mine closings or partial closings, financial losses, and a share price down dramatically. I pulled up the share price today, and it's down 67% year over year, and it's down from a peak 5 years ago of $62 a share to a little over $9 a share today. So China does have an impact on the U.S. In the end, we pieced together a view of the Chinese economy, which many pundits now think is stabilizing. If you read current reports, there's a lot of chatter about a sudden increase in auto purchases. And that's based on data, as I said earlier, the Chinese government chooses to tell us about. We don't know the timeline of that data, and we don't know its fulsomeness. But we are beginning to see a trickle of data that suggests the Chinese economy is stabilizing. As you travel around China, as I do, you know from observation that over the last 5 years, there's been a very large real estate bubble. In 2010, construction cranes were everywhere. Apartments, retail centers, office buildings, Western-style residential developments, etc., abounded. Today, many of those projects stand only partially completed, and the cranes are blowing in the wind. I recently stayed in a high-end hotel in Beijing, built adjacent to a brand new Western-style shopping mall. Looking out my hotel window, and by the way, I had to look through choking smog. I literally could not see to the parking lot out here. I could see that the center had many Western retail-branded stores, so I chose to walk down there. When I got down there, I discovered that there were very few, and I mean very few, shoppers. It was eerie, it was almost ghost-like to see the condition of the center. So after 25 or 30 years of amazing growth, China is clearly stalled. The government has instituted Western economic policies, including easing money and propping up financial institutions. We know from our experience that even if these policies are successful, it may be 2 to 3 years before China gets back on track. Energy, materials, minerals, autos, pretty much everything that isn't made by Apple will suffer from the lack of Chinese demand. If you pay attention to China's recovery, there may be an opportunity for investors that read the cycle correctly and jump into Chinese equities in early recovery. But investments in hard assets are a different matter, and you have to be very careful. It is still an economic model dominated by the state, and all aspects of investment are subject to the strategy of the state. I've tried to develop an airline in China for the last 10 years. Chinese government has invited us to do that. But the Chinese government wants to tell us what the pricing band for our seats has to be. It wants to tell us where we can fly and when we can fly and where we can't fly. And by the way, because it's a matter of national policy, they want to tell us what kinds of airplanes will fly. So it is still a very state-mandated oversight. India. Well, the investment world got pretty excited when Narendra Modi was elected prime minister about 18 months ago. He's level-headed, pro-business, a supporter of direct foreign investment, opposed to the stifling regulatory environment of India. And since his election, the government has indeed made progress on energizing the economy, developing plans for infrastructure development, and attracting foreign capital. But Modi has done less well in stabilizing relations between India's Hindu and a large Muslim minority population. We read about periodic religious violence, and by the way, I was 1 week away from being a participant in the terrorist attack on the Taj Hotel in Mumbai. So the internal strife and his failure to take leadership in dealing with it has resulted in Modi paying a significant political price at home, losing 2 recent elections, one in the state of Bihar and the other one outside Mumbai. And he lost both of them by a large margin. So you have to wonder what will be the direction of the politics, which in turn will drive the direction for the economy. My experience in India, and by the way, this has nothing to do with my view of the fact that it is a wonderful cultural experience and a place that I've thoroughly enjoyed spending time in, but it reminds me that the British Raj may have helped mold the Indian commitment to democracy, certainly built the railroads and constructed infrastructure like the electric power system, but the British also cursed India with a very bureaucratic civil servant mentality. Getting almost anything done in a legal manner, compliant with the layers of regulation, is a quagmire. And to circumvent that quagmire, India has developed a very healthy and systematic commitment to corruption. We've had letters of intent to invest in 5 different Indian airlines that needed capital, needed management expertise, and we've completed exactly none of them. We couldn't get past the arcane taxes, the regulatory environment, and of course, we don't engage in corruption. I regularly think about the opportunities in India. I would like to think there's opportunities in India, but it's tough. Europe, you talked about Europe. Let's start by keeping in mind that Europe is really at least 3 different entities, maybe even 5. At a minimum, you have Western Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, and the United Kingdom. One could argue that Western Europe is really divided into Northern Europe and Southern Europe. I'll leave it to you to decide where the French fall in that category because I'm not sure they know themselves. But the European Union, no matter how you define the geography, is an arbitrary design. Even Europeans have stereotypical views of themselves. Northern Europe does the work and funds the union. That's their view of themselves. Southern Europe lives a good life and enjoys the ride. The UK is special, stood off from the continent, and shouldn't be considered part of the union, unless, of course, there's an economic or political advantage to being so considered, in which case it is part of the union. And Central and Eastern Europe is too many countries in too small a space still dealing with political turmoil from the disintegration of the former Soviet Union, with the left and right alternating political control. From a business perspective, we have focused on Central and Eastern Europe. We own an airline based in Budapest. And we feel it has the best entry point values and the most upside relative to those baseline values. We worry that the balance of the European Union can't seem to find a strategy forward, certainly not one that all the member states can agree. The economies are geographically and by product segregated. Politics are filled with historic tensions. Russia looms over the region. But an economic recovery, albeit in fits and starts, is beginning to make slow progress across the European Union. We see that in real, everyday economics in terms of like passenger seats in a particular market that are sold. So my view of Europe today is, look, as a tourist, enjoy it. It's a great place to go, a lot of history. But as an investor, you need to be very thoughtful, and you need to be very specific about what it is you want to do and how you want to accomplish it. The good news is, and I think Elliot made this point, is that the legal systems are trustworthy, and in spite of a tendency to over-regulate, private capital is still protected and is in demand. Brazil. Well, look, I graduated high school in Brazil, and I still have friends and family there. I obviously wanted to succeed in its efforts to move into the first world. But the question is, can it? Brazilian politics, like much of Latin America, have historically overwhelmed progress. Great natural resources, great national ambition, they're all victims to populist, incompetent politics. And of course, corruption. Not the version of India's small-time corruption, but big-time corruption at very senior levels of the Brazilian government. And it's been a frequent visitor over the years to the Brazilians. Today, the country, already plagued by falling energy and metals prices and a deflating currency, is a political and economic mess. President Dilma Rousseff is herself caught up in a gigantic corruption scandal, and her government may fall, and she may be impeached. So you'd have to be a very brave investor to put capital to work today in Brazil. While I love adversity as an investment thesis, it needs to be the adversity that can be resorted in a political and economic context. That's not Brazil as we know it today. Russia. Well, I refuse to talk about Russia. I left $50 million there a couple of years ago. I would suggest you just read Bill Browder's book, Red Notice, and you'll understand why Russia should be totally avoided. I'm not a big fan of national immorality, and that is what reigns there. So there you have it, a quick tour of major regional economies. In summary, the US and North America, you need to be a thoughtful, educated investor, but there are still lots of opportunities. China, too soon, and remember, the government oversight limits foreign investment opportunity or shapes it to the policy. India, you want in the worst way for India to be in your investment horizon, as you just know it has great potential, but the regulatory environment, corruption, and sectarian issues have to be addressed. It's not for the faint of heart. Europe, yeah, sure, but while they call it the European Union, understand that it is not one that is united from a political or economic perspective. Brazil, go have a caipirinha, go to the beach, come back in 2 years. Russia, nope. Other places that aren't in the BRIC or major economy, members of the major economic forces, but are worth looking at if you're an investor has a worldly view, is Colombia and Chile and Latin America are both stars in the region. Chile in particular has a very good legal system and an adherence to legal process, which is valuable to an investor. And in Asia, I think, as Elliot commented, Singapore is becoming the financial center of Asia. It's a great place to do business. Had office there for 7 years. They are very direct, straightforward, and the legal system is tied to the legal system in the UK. They follow UK decisions. So you have a sense of protection. And so that's my overview as we've kind of wandered around the world's economies and tried to put some practical application to the theoretical points you heard earlier. And I'm now open to questions, Dean.
So I may not get this exactly right, but something you said I thought was very intriguing, and it was that you like adversity as a context for investing. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know how I got in this role, but I became kind of a Mr. Fix-It in my business career. I didn't start off to do that, but it's clear that in business there's frequently a lack of discipline and a lack of commitment and execution against a plan. And so that when you see adversity to be defined either by a company in stress or a company in a economic environment that's under stress, we view that as an opportunity because there are going to be very few others looking at that opportunity from an investment perspective. And if you have a point of view, and if you have discipline and commitment to the execution of the plan you agree upon, we've had great success. We've created 7 airlines in the Indigo Partners portfolio, one in Singapore, one in Indonesia, the one in Russia, God forbid, the one based in Hungary, Spirit Airlines in the US, and now Frontier. A lot of those were in some state of adversity. Frontier's a good example. Frontier had come through bankruptcy, was essentially, it lost $75 million the year before, 2 years before we acquired it. And our first year of ownership, by having strict adherence to a business model and a business plan and discipline against it, the airline reported $140 million in net income. And that flows from just taking a different view than the predecessors on how to manage against that adversity.
Very interesting. So we have a number of questions about other countries that I'll get to in a second, but the president would like to know what the role of education is in the future and the growth of our economy. I think I got that right.
Yes. So she and I have had this conversation on a number of occasions, and look, it's and we were talking briefly with the speaker. Arizona has lost out on a number of recent large corporate opportunities. I mean, you read about Tesla, but there have been a lot of things that have made their way through the state and gone elsewhere. And the two major reasons, they may not tell all of you, but I know from the inside, the two major reasons are they don't feel the education system is supportive or producing the quality and of students that they need as they grow their businesses that would be based here. And the second reason is more tied to economic issues. Other states don't have state income tax, and so they start looking at Nevada or Texas or Florida, which have found other ways to create a revenue stream. So I think it would be impossible to ignore the fact that the state has fared poorly from an education perspective as it gets graded by outsiders, and that is an obligation that all of us have, the speaker has, we all have to fix. We've got to fix that. And it's not just K through 12. We've basically been privatizing the state universities step by step over the last 10 years because the state has withdrawn more of its support. It had economic reasons to do it at that point in time. And the net result is tuitions had to go up, student loans have increased, and we in effect are not fulfilling our obligation to our students.
So let me expand on that just a little bit and ask your thoughts on the role of vocational education. And I'd like for you to address that from two perspectives. One, what we traditionally think of as vocational education, the trades. And then also the role of, or the tension between traditional liberal arts education and more profession-focused education.
Well, I'll take the latter first. I went to a university that, in effect, unless you went to the engineering college, there was nothing but liberal arts. So that when you got your degree would be in political science or literature or economy or something in a more general tone. That almost forced you, if you were going to compete, and you were going to compete in the marketplace, to go to graduate school, so that you became the lawyer that Eliot didn't become, or you became a doctor, or you created a career. That approach to education, I think, has great value in the sense that it broadens the undergraduate dramatically in terms of aspects of history and culture that they don't get otherwise. But it does force a different path to the student. So I think there's room for both points of view, and I mean, a lot depends on what the purpose of the university is at that point in its cycle. And a lot of it depends upon what the state, if it's a state university, needs it to produce. So I don't think you can say one's good and one's bad. And the first question was
about more trade-based vocational education.
So it's a very popular concept these days to say that every kid ought to go to college. I get political pamphlets to that effect. I think that's an overstatement. I mean, the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people who, for a variety of family and other reasons, vocational education is the right thing for them because they earn a trade that's consistent with what their family values and what they want from how they want to run their life. I have a property in Montana, and it's common in Montana. They say, well, you guys live to work. We work to live. And that is a different mentality, and a lot of people have that mentality, and in which case maybe following a more formalized track is not the right place for you. So I'm actually a believer in vocational education.
So that's interesting. Marco Rubio, Barack Obama, and Bill Franke all agree on something around vocational education. So maybe we should pay attention to that.
I've known every president from John F. Kennedy except the sitting president, so I have no comment.
Well, at least I'm not going to ask you how you feel about Russia. So, so a number of people are curious about your thoughts on the $15 minimum wage, and there are arguments that might be a net benefit for the economy. There are arguments that it might be a net detriment. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one thing to have a nice idea, and another thing to have an idea that supports the economy. It strikes me that it is a worthy objective to say that everyone should have a national income of $30,000, which is, if you do the math backwards, is about what $15 an hour produces. But if that isn't managed in a very careful manner, what's going to happen is you're going to drive a lot of smaller family businesses out of business, because they all work at margins. If you know somebody who owns a store that sells fabric or party goods or a fast food restaurant, they live on, it's a matter of love for them, and they live on very narrow margins. If you cram $15 an hour down on them, you're going to have a lot of them choose to go out of business because they've lost their profitability. So you have a clash between your human instincts on the one hand and the economic reality on the other. And my only comment would be it's a fair objective to say $15 an hour, but you better be darn careful about how you get there, how you implement it, when you implement it.
Great, thank you. So that brings up a question about smaller businesses. We know they're an engine for economic growth. They face a lot of headwinds. So what sort of advice could you give to the small businesses in northern Arizona around how they can thrive and how they can have a positive impact on the region?
Well, I've had this discussion with some of the students in prior years. Small business if you're a small business owner, you have to have a vision of what it is you want to do and how you want to do it, and that has to coincide with the market wanting your vision, all right? So those are the first steps. Then you have to create in effect, a plan of how you're going to manage the business. You can't just over a cup of coffee wing it, because it's too dangerous a world. And so you need to actually have some form of a business plan, be different levels of sophistication, but you have to have some form of business plan. And by the way, you better find a friendly banker so you can understand how the money comes and the money goes. And you have to manage your business with discipline. Unfortunately, a lot of family businesses or startup businesses are matters of emotion. They want to do this. They're always been their lifetime ambition. And it, as a result, has weak underpinning, a weak foundation to the business. So my only advice is take it easy. Get yourself organized. Make all the stops. Do some market analysis. Have a business plan. And your chances of success improve significantly.
And go to Alliance Bank for your friendly bankers. So a number of people ask about some other countries that you didn't mention. I know you own an airline or you own a controlling interest in an airline in Mexico, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
People are also curious about Panama and the canal situation, and then our neighbor to the north, Canada.
Okay, so Mexico, there's an airline there called Volaris, which we are the largest shareholder in, and we bought actually Carlos Slim's interest. Interesting, nice long story to that, but he had some disagreements with these other Mexican shareholders, and so we bought his interest. It was an existing airline, and it had a business model that was inconsistent with the needs of Mexico. It was trying to compete heads up with Aeromexico, and that wasn't going to work. So we changed the model around, and we attracted terrific Mexican management to the airline, and it's been very successful. And so what have we learned? Well, we've learned that in Mexico, again, if you have the right business plan and you're well positioned and you have the right access, it's a great place to do business. The right access, though, is important because, like a lot of Latin America, it's still oligarchical in many ways. So you still have a narrow group at the top of the food chain who control a lot of what happens in any given Latin country. And so you have to have some access to the regulators and to the government in order to be successful. But we've found Mexico ready, able, and willing. Panama has gone totally nuts. I mean, it used to be in the old days. By the way, I spent a little time in the military and was actually stationed in Panama during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that point in time, the general prevailing wisdom was that Panama's growth was based upon being an intermediary for the drug flow from Colombia north. That's not the case anymore. It may well be an intermediary for capital moving around the world. There are some 50-odd major money center banks located in Panama. You fly into the city, you think you're flying into Singapore or Shanghai. I mean, it's just high-rise after high-rise. And it has become a financial center for Latin America. And so it isn't, it's kind of like Singapore, it is not a manufacturing base, it's not a large commercial base, but if you're interested in the financial perspective, it's become a major place. And the third one was?
Canada.
Well, from our little narrow view, first thing we have to remember is Canada is a big geography with like 30 million people, okay? It's not a big geography with 200 million people. So you have to like, it's like Australia, you have to like scope yourself down. And it is a geography that is spread from hell to breakfast. I mean, it goes from here to there over long stretches. The government, the country, for historic reasons, tend to divide kind of in the median line to having French antecedents on the East Coast and English antecedents on the West Coast, and may the twain never meet. And so you have to be thoughtful about Canada from the standpoint of what are you trying to do? I mean, it has a significant mineral and forest assets. It has historically now energy assets. And it's a country that played properly, we think has a real value. We look at Canada hard.
Interesting. So this is a little bit of an unfair question, and I'm not asking based on your role with Frontier, but not surprisingly, a number of people are curious about the prospects of getting another airline or other destinations out of Flagstaff. And again, I'm not asking specifically about Frontier.
Okay, so I went out to America West, which was in bankruptcy, and we kind of turned it around. And former mayor over here, we had conversations at that point in time. The real interest was, well, when are we going to make like Pulliam Field a hub? And that didn't happen. And so as the years have gone by, this is an interesting little sidebar. The fact of the matter that the world's largest airline today is American Airlines. That's really America West. Because America West acquired U.S. Airways, took the name of U.S. Airways, but it acquired it. U.S. Airways then acquired American Airlines, and every person in the senior management of American Airlines I hired at America West. Yeah. So you think about that. That's a little airline that could. And you now have American Airlines serving Pulliam Field, on a regional basis, and you have others. The problem with communities the size of Flag is organizing an aircraft and funding its flight is it's a valuable asset. So you try to put that asset where it has the most opportunity. And people have tried Flagstaff and it's going to Denver or Flagstaff going to Phoenix. There actually, way back when, there were flights from Flagstaff that went through on to Tucson, and then I think for a while they tried to do LA. But at the end of the day, couldn't get the passenger count on the airplanes to make Flagstaff a better alternative than Topeka. So it's a competitive world. And some smaller communities, Missoula, Montana comes to mind, University of Montana located there. They have actually engaged in promoting, in effect underwriting in part, revenue to the airline. That's induced airlines to go into Missoula. That's more difficult for Flagstaff. But you're gonna have what you have until somebody is convinced that they can make money flying it.
Personally, I'm just glad we're not flying the Dash 8s anymore, and
Yeah.
we have a jet. So the look on my wife's face when she watched the landing gear go up on the Dash 8 was pretty priceless. So just, this is not a question. We have one nomination for you as Secretary of Commerce. And we do have people that are curious on the languages that you speak.
I speak Spanish, English, kinda. I used to speak competent Portuguese, but as the years have gone by, you start losing vocabulary from lack of usage, so I wouldn't say that. And I speak a little Guarani Indian, but that's it.
Nice, nice. That's a lot more than most of us. So in the 10 or 15 minutes we have remaining, I'd really like to focus on the students that are in the audience. What do you think are the biggest challenges that they're going to face before they come back to the 80th Economic Outlook Conference?
Well, the biggest challenges are obviously the globalization of the world economies, and that's just happened in my lifetime, and it's accelerating. The pace is accelerating dramatically. And I think that students today have to be globalized. They can't, I mean, maybe they're going to go back to Winslow, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, even Winslow is being impacted by globalization. So you do need to think outside the box, and they need to go through a path in their education process that gives them exposure to the international world and markets and what's happening internationally so that they can understand the flow of capital, so they understand the difference in supply and demand. And I worry about that. We've hired 10 interns out of NAU, and by the way, they've all just done exceptionally well. We sent them on to, they have to go to graduate school. We sent them to Yale and Cornell, unfortunately USC, but they've done really well. But when they show up, the first day they show up, here's what we find. And you know, this is a big thing for me. It's hard for them to write a complete sentence. Communication in the written word isn't good. They have good analytical skills. They generally have good accounting and financial skills, but they don't have a clue about the world. So we started 10 years ago, when we made our gift to the college, one of our focuses was on two things, or two of our focuses, writing and internationalization of the student body. I'm not sure we've made a whole lot of progress on writing. Maybe we have, I hope we have. And we have made progress on students who now, interns who show up, actually have some sense of the world, which is really important.
That's great. So what do you think are besides not having some knowledge of the global economy, what do you think is the biggest pitfall that a graduate might face? What's the big mistake they might make as they're coming out of college?
Biggest pitfall. You know, they tend to be individual as opposed to some macro pitfall, but I guess it would be a lack of focus, that they're not, and it's true of almost everybody in this room. When you went to college, some of you may have had a clue, but most of us didn't. and you kind of make your way through a process that gets you a degree, and then kind of hope, right? Well, I think that's the biggest risk to the students today, is having a focus, understanding the path they want to follow, and following that path, and thus avoiding the deviations and the 2 steps forward, 1 step back process that a lot of us probably went through. Other than that, I think it is a very individualized issue.
So that's interesting. That aligns pretty well with your advice to business owners.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So I would just like to close by personally thanking you for not just the gift, but the commitment that you've made to our students. It makes a tremendous difference, and as our new provost likes to say, it changes the slope of the line upward for those students, and we're deeply appreciative.
Thank you.